Beautiful humans. Happy Monday. Welcome to Embodied Impact. Welcome Anne, welcome Amna and Kwangjian. So we'll get started. There's probably a few more people dropping in over the course of the next hour. What we'll do today is a bit of a different format. As usually we have conversation and there's a guest. What I'll do today I want to present some research that I've done over the last 4 years about in self-experimentation around addictive behaviors, around codependence, around flow states. And really what I want you to take away from the session today is that reframe that addictions don't need to be like a shameful thing that make you hide and basically contract your energy. But they can be beautiful pointers to move you towards a more expanded state of life. So what I have today as well, I have a whole bunch of slides to give some visual context to what I'm talking about and explaining. And I'm also having lots of notes from my self-experimentations and my research. So I'll refer to them like as I go along. So you may see me looking down to my notes every now and again to remind myself of all the points that I want to make and bring into the session today. And for any of you who have questions as we go along, there is a Q&A box here on the side where you can put them in and I'll answer them towards the end. Or as Anna, she's already found the chat and used the chat, you can also put the questions in the chat and I'll answer them from there. So and last thing is, from all the research that I've done, I've found some really, really interesting patterns, and it appears to me that there's a new way of actually very quickly dissolving addictive behaviors through data-driven self-compassion, as I call it. Employing wearable tech to understand like why your body is actually creating that behavior. And then the compassion piece of like, it's not like why the addiction, but why the pain. And I'm having a hypothesis that within 4 weeks that can be transformed drastically. So under the video, there is a button to apply for an alpha program. And that will be in the beginning of the new year, where I'm wanting to take 3 people through this process that I have gone through in the self-experimentation. And so I'm inviting 3 people in. So if that's something that resonates with you as you go along in this session today, then I'm super excited to connect with you more and see if there could be a great collaboration. So with that, I'll get started. I'll share the slides now. Great. I hope you can all see this piece. So today's point is really about like cracking your flow code. And it will be a really vulnerable experience and super like heartfelt and genuine and honest, as it's something that I've gone through myself, and I feel there's so many other people that I've been speaking to one-on-one who have experienced similar things, and now it feels like, okay, cool, let's bring it into the world and see how it creates value for society and allows us to actually connect much more heartfelt with one another. So my name is Tobias Hofmeister. I'm the founder of Embodied, and with that I've been hosting this podcast and running a number of different community formats throughout this year. But really my background is in mechanical engineering and design and research, much in the sustainable energy field. And that's really what I'm passionate about, is like energy research, and not just for like the built environment or for sustainable energy creation, but really I feel the most important part is like the energy that we have inside. And I see that codependence and addictive behaviors, they are such massive like energy drains, and at the same time also big wells where we can bring the energy forth again. And yeah, I've also been like a massive high achiever. So that is where I feel this whole approach that I'm talking about will most likely resonate specifically with high achievers, with people that achieve highly because they feel they need to prove themselves to the world. And yeah, I feel that that will be interesting, personal, and vulnerable. Now, the interesting piece is with light and darkness, they exist in equal measure. And if we live a small life and there's only a little bit of light, there's only a little bit of darkness. Or said in another way, if we are only able to hold and experience a small level of our inner darkness, then we can also only experience a small level of our inner light. Now, if we expand our life and we want to experience much more of our light, then inevitably we need to be able to experience a lot more of our darkness. And unless we're willing to really experience our darkness, then that is really where addictions will come in and manifest in our lives. And it's been very much me. I've been really seeking this life of peak experiences. I really always wanted a life without the darkness. And by wanting light without darkness, what has happened on the other side is addictive behaviors that have come into my life and run havoc quite a bit. Now, for me, really the core desire was to really just feel alive. And that's in fact rather simple, because in fact, what I'm noticing now is that feeling alive means just being present and allowing myself to feel all my feelings. And whether it's the feelings on the light side, which is joy and love and abundance and excitement, it's also feeling the feelings on the dark side, like anger, rage, disappointment, resentment, hatred. And feeling the feelings on the dark side, it's for me been really an experience over the last year. And the more I've allowed these feelings to be in my life, the more I actually felt freedom and that real sense of aliveness. So that's being that with intense light comes also intense darkness. And it's, I feel really the quest of our personal evolution and transition to be able to hold more of the darkness. And yeah, that's very much the focus of today's presentation, is like, how can we learn to love our darkness so that we can make it into more light. And throughout the presentation, I'll talk you through basically 3 possibilities or paradigm shifts that I see around turning addictions and darkness into something that we can honor and hold and ultimately turn into light. And towards the very end, I'll also share some visual insight from the wearable technology that I've been using to gain that self-insight and the data-driven self-compassion. So you'll get a glimpse of what that piece looks like as well. Now, I'm saying it again, that the light and the dark coexist in equal measure, and we cannot have one without the other. But it's really our journey to becoming integrated human beings that we are able to hold our darkness and our light. And in order to be ultimate, we don't need to act on either of it. But knowing that it's there and that it's part of us is super important. So, as I said, it's a presentation that really comes from the heart and very much shows my journey. So I'll share my light with you, and I'll also share my darkness with you. And yeah, with that, building that deeper level of integrity. Because I feel it does support all of us when all of us are becoming more vulnerable and being like, hey, this is who I am. And not pretending to wear masks, because masks are ultimately what then drives addictions. It drives that movement into isolation, drives that movement into shame. But as soon as we can own everything that is us, whether it's light and enjoyable and easy to digest for the general public, or whether it's something that creates challenge for ourselves and potentially societally not very acceptable, then we're ultimately creating that level of freedom. So for me, the things on the light side is that I traveled and lived and worked in over 50 countries on 4 continents, very much throughout my 20s. I had the amazing privilege to sit in the jungle with like shamans and equally presenting my research on a global scale and being in front of big audiences and talking about social practice theory and applied design thinking. I got degrees from 4 universities in Germany, the US, and Sweden, and Norway. It's been really interesting. I've had the privilege to work with researchers from MIT and from Stanford, publishing 12 papers and presenting my research at 4 global conferences. Won awards for like best innovation and creativity, for leading engineering design teams to build bio-inspired flight machines. And also like personally, I had my first son at like 25, so became a father super early in my life. And I'm fortunate to have had a super varied career already thus far, working on wind turbines in China and building novel solar cell technologies in Germany. Actually, Anna, that was when I was working in Freiburg at Fraunhofer ISE. And then later on I started supporting tech startups and securing funding and becoming productive in society. And then worked on legal tech or a blockchain company for legal tech application. Ultimately then hosted masterminds for Mind Valley and Forever Coach. And it was all really rewarding and exciting, but it doesn't come without the darkness. And for me, the darkness has like just entirely throughout my life been this like a feeling of like inadequacy, and this sense of like imposter syndrome, which ultimately has been, I feel, a driving force to do more and need to be more and do another degree. And it's interesting that the darkness drives the light in my experience. I also recognize that I've been heavily codependent on my intimate partners throughout the time, especially in my 20s, when I was early in life, getting married, having my kids, and ultimately not really knowing what I was doing. Throughout my teens and 20s, I've been also addicted to porn. And so that's another part that I really want to bring into the conversation today, is around addictive behaviors. I'll speak from my experience around like addiction to porn and generally like sexual energy. Also with my partner, I co-created like mild domestic violence. I got divorced actually just a few weeks ago. Finally got my divorce papers. And unconsciously but actively, I always created disturbance when things got too stable and too secure and actually quite nice. But somehow my system just doesn't like nice. It needs to be chaotic, and when it's chaotic, then it seems like I'm home. And obviously that comes from an early child experiences, and I rationally understand that. And I also didn't know how to love, and least of all to love myself. And so I always felt like I needed to outsource being loved by someone because I couldn't love myself. And if that person couldn't love me, then there were behaviors of like punishing that person. And it's really like warped and twisted, like psyche things that come out in the darkness when there's a lot of light. And being super disconnected from my feelings and from actually being present in the moment. So I've also always like either in the future or in the past, but never actually like really just present with everything that is. So but ultimately what I've noticed is that like having this darkness is the soil from which like all my light can actually grow. And as we say in Buddhism, it's really like turning poison into medicine. And before anything actually grows, even like in the natural world, it's stuck in the earth where it's dark. And in that darkness, it germinates and slowly breaks its way into the light. And then there it begins to flourish. And I'm sharing all of this because I know that, yes, I have my light, I have my darkness, and all of you have your light and you have your darkness. And the more you can be honest with that, with yourself, like with the dark parts of your twisted psyche, the more you can accept others and actually, by opening up actually a much, much deeper level of conversation rather than being stuck kind of like at the facade of like, oh, cool, yeah, showing you all the good sides. But the moment you actually share some of the sides that are a bit cracked, that is really the moments when you can create intimacy. And those are the moments when it actually creates these experiences that are truly nourishing, these moments of like vulnerability. And when you then realize, wow, the other person actually accepts me for that as well, where true beauty arises. And that's also where, love actually really comes through. So we'll move into flow, because the important piece why I shared the light and darkness is that flow arises from the deep now. And the deep now meaning that like super present moment when, yes, I can feel joy, but I could also feel like rage or upset or sadness or love or elation or whatever there may be. And unless we're courageous enough to actually feel what is present for us right now, it's very, very difficult to experience flow. Now, the really cool thing is like when you experience flow, it's like McKinsey has done this study that you become like up to 500% more productive. So that means when you're able to access flow, you can basically go to work on Mondays and take Tuesday to Friday off, and you're exactly as productive as your steady state peers. In our modern, super fast moving world, also flow is super amazing because it increases your creativity by 500 to 700%. And it's a study that's done by the Flow Research Collective around Stephen Kotler, who has written extensively on the topic of flow. And he very much explored flow also from the sort of like action adventure sport angle, where from what I'm seeing is actually a lot of people that have very difficult childhoods and early life experiences, they become action adventure sports athletes, and they are just pushing the limits of like what's humanly possible. And there's a super interesting, I feel, similarity, because flow is a really addictive state as well. But if you're able to create it in a way that becomes societal meaningful, then it just unlocks you to a totally new layer of productivity and what you're able to do. Now, what flow really is, it's this amazing optimal state of consciousness. And we speak about it in the world of business as, okay, it's a peak experience where you are able to achieve something that you really didn't think you could. It moves you to sort of like near high-speed decision-making, where the information comes in and you do something with it and you're responding. It's not reacting, but you're responding, because basically your whole system is able to take in a lot more information that actually you consciously can, but it moves it through the entire intelligence of your body, really. And the brainwaves in a flow state, they're slowing down to the line between dreaming and daydreaming. So you're having access to not just your conscious waking awareness, but also to this much greater unconscious awareness. And you're also getting that brain hemisphere synchronization, so that instead of basically just working analytical or more creative, you're getting into this like cool mingle state where the analytical and the creative side feed each other the whole time. And what it feels like, so after Stephen Kotler and Jimmy Wheel, who run the Flow Genome Project and the Flow Research Collective, it's that, and probably many of you have experienced it, let's say the flow, where it just feels like that moment is just so, like everything feels so effortless. Things just like boom, 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 like happen very easily. It feels really rich. It feels that a small moment could sort of like be stretched intensely, and it moves into a space of like timelessness. But also at the same time, long stretches of time can go past really quickly. And last thing is that there's this deep immersion, so that you're basically forgetting about yourself, but you're really immersed with the thing that you're doing, whether it's playing an instrument or snowboarding or road biking in my case. And yeah, then when you're sort of emerging out of the flow state, it's like, wow, krass. I actually need to go to the bathroom, or I haven't like drank anything for 2.5 hours. So, and why all this happens is that, like, in a flow state, basically your prefrontal cortex is turned off. There's this transient hyperfrontality, and so it allows you to just be more present with everything rather than just having that sort of like self-conscious, more inner critic-based presence within you. Now, I want to talk a bit more about that we are designed for flow. And what I mean by that is that flow is what researchers call a autotelic experience. Now, autotelic in layman's terms means nothing else than it's an end in itself. So being in a state of flow is something that we want to get back to. And whatever created that flow state will become the vehicle that we want to re-engage with so that we can experience that flow state again. Because I'll talk about in a second, like all these amazing neurochemicals that flow releases in your body. And that's nothing else than any addiction. So whenever you've seen, so I live in Edinburgh here in Scotland, and Leith has been previously I think in the 80s, like I think the most like drug crime and most drug abuse in Europe. And you still see people walking in the streets that are clearly, they're on a mission. They have to get their substance. And what I think is really, really interesting in that sense is that risk goes down, like the creativity that comes in within these people to somehow get the next hit is remarkable. And that is effectively the same for when you're optimizing your life for flow. You will become immensely creative to find abilities to get into these flow states again. And if these flow states are coming from a place of like deep integrity, then it's the most rewarding way to live, to get that sense of like deep fulfillment while contributing to society and humanity from really the bottom of your heart. Now, when we basically look inside our body, like what happens when we're in flow, like flow produces the most potent neurochemistry that our bodies can create. It's really the most potent neurochemistry basically on the planet. And here on the right, you see these chemicals that our body releases, which are norepinephrine, dopamine, anandamide, serotonin, and endorphins. And together, it's this amazing cocktail that makes you feel just fucking amazing. Interesting piece with flow is that it becomes this big neurochemical dump. So all these neurochemicals get released into your system, and the more neurochemicals are released at once in your body, the more your body is like, wow, this thing is important. Let's tag it and let's know how to come back to it. Now, when we look at like norepinephrine and dopamine, those are really chemicals that focus us and that lower sort of the signal to noise ratio. So we become more present for that specific moment. And then anandamide promotes this lateral thinking. So it's a bit like THC. So you become more creative basically by connecting far-flung ideas together. And then, yeah, with endorphins, like whoever amongst you is a runner, so if you've been running for long distance and then you get this runner's high, that's really when the endorphins are just like flooding your body and ultimately covering the pain of that long exertion. But yeah, allowing you to feel amazing so that you have this space to recover. And yeah, what flow does is flow jacks up your learning capacity. So it makes you learn more quickly. So if you're like a student, for example, and it's super, super powerful. Or I mean, even like in careers, like it's super powerful to be in a flow state because it makes you adapt more quickly. And in a world where so many things are changing in a moment, being able to quickly adapt is, yeah, just so powerful at the moment. Now, And if our body basically can create these like chemicals within, that's another interesting component, is that with like drug addiction, for example, it moves us towards finding these chemicals on the outside. So for example, cocaine is similar to dopamine. And so you see basically all these substance dependencies on the outside, because those are things that our body can usually create if we're putting our body in like a meaningful environment. But yeah, if it's not created inside, then you can basically easily get it from the outside. Cocaine, THC, speed, whatever it is. Speed effectively similar to endorphins, THC similar to anandamide, cocaine similar to dopamine. And yeah, so you're feeling that rush, even though you actually haven't put your body in a environment where it produces these chemicals by itself. Now, to get into a flow state in a sustainable and healthy way, and I feel that's super, super important to stress here, is it demands that we're aware of our darkness so that we equally are aware of our light. But what really blocks us from actually experiencing these flow states is the lacking courage to actually feeling everything that this present moment brings to us. And I said it earlier, whether, maybe happiness or sadness, it's that willingness to just be present with what is, rather than sort of like checking out and being like, oh no, I don't want to feel that. Or rejection is a really big one for me. I don't want to feel rejection. And I know I have a lot of like little coping strategies to not feel it. But the moments when I actually allow myself to feel the rejection, it goes away. And it's really interesting. It's like, wow, it's almost, I'm so afraid of something that dissipates so quickly. And all it is, it really comes down to like super, super early, like even pre-verbal experiences in my life. Now, to really being present in the moment, that's where it brings us to just the necessity of like talking about addictions. Because from my experience and the work that I've done with Gabo Mate, so he's a friend of a friend, and we had some deep conversations about addictions and why people experience the pain and what these pains are, how these pains can be resolved. It's really that addictions are these expressions of our coping strategies to not feel what a moment presents by making us not present in the moment. And I think that's a really, really big part. Addictions allow us to check out from our present moment experience rather than actually leaning in further into this experience. Because when we lean in further, we realize, wow, we will not dissipate. Like nothing really happens other than there may be whatever, a pain somewhere in our body. But the moment we lean in, so I had this experience when I went to a silent meditation retreat in India, and we were sitting, and in the beginning, my right knee was continuously hurting. And at some point I was like, okay, I'll just follow the guidance of this teacher and just get closer to the pain. And so I realized, it's not my whole knee that's hurting. It's just these like very small points on my knee that seem to hurt. And I got more curious about these small points. And then somehow they disappeared and never came back to this day. It's really the courage of putting attention to where it hurts that allows us to really find freedom. And that is really the shift that I invite you to make in this presentation today, where so often what addictions do, they drive shame. They drive this behavior of like, isolate more, feel really miserable about like who you are and why you do the thing you do. And while when we draw insight from these addictions, then it can lead to gratitude. And I'll just share a small story here. So I said earlier that throughout my 20s, I was using porn all the time to basically self-soothe. And some people say it's an obsessive behavior, some people say it's addictive. Just for the sake, let's say I was porn addicted. Now, a few years ago, when I started exploring this wearable technology and understanding more about my nervous system and why my nervous system does the things it does, it came to me one day, it was like, yeah, let me actually put on that equipment and masturbate and realize, like, what is going on? Like, why does my body want that behavior? And what I realized is that when I was addicted to porn and I was engaging with that modality, what actually happened within me was a shift from being in a stressed state to being in a much more relaxed and parasympathetically engaged state. Because what happened on the surface was actually I was breathing differently. I was breathing much more into my belly. I was becoming more present breath-wise with my body. And so what then happens is that my parasympathetic nervous system gets activated and my body was moving into a state of equilibrium, moving out of a state of stress towards a state of being more balanced. And that moment when I realized, like, holy fuck, my body always knew what it needed. And it just found that modality because that modality was always present. When I grew up, my dad had always these calendars with like naked women all around the house. And yeah, as a boy, at some point, I realized, like, wow, these things actually make me feel good. And then I ended up basically knowing the best to what I knew at the time. It's like, cool, this thing makes me feel good. This thing makes me balanced. Great. I will engage with that. Now, the tricky part with that was that it was something that's societally not accepted. And so even though my body actually got the benefit of finding that balance, psychologically it became like quite challenging because it was a behavior that seemed, yeah, just like not acceptable. And when I then saw the data and just there was this like this amazing wave of gratitude. I was like, wow, thank you. Always knew. And it suddenly, boom, like in this moment, basically like all the shame got obliterated into the sense of, okay, cool. That was not the most appropriate way, yet it did the job. And there was this gratitude towards my, yeah, basically this younger person that was able to find a way to self-soothe and like manage difficult situations. And with that gratitude came the freedom, where the behavior had no longer any power over me, but I could engage or disengage as I pleased. And towards the end, I'll share some of the data so you can see. Because the powerful thing then is, once you know what the behavior does for you or for your nervous system more specifically, you can just swap it out for other behaviors that create the same effect on your nervous system without the potential stigma. So it leads us into this whole space around safety and specifically psychological safety. It says powerful research that it takes about 40% of our energy to repress parts of ourselves if we're in a psychologically unsafe environment. And here's really the piece that addictions come as coping strategies when we're in a psychologically unsafe environment. Because when we're in a psychologically unsafe environment, what happens is our system is in stress. And then our system is in stress, we can only really take so much stress without either getting burnt out or finding some way to self-soothe ourselves. Now, depending on our early experiences, we have more helpful or unhelpful ways of soothing ourselves. And if these ways are unhelpful, then they often turn out to, be in that addictive space. So what this looks like in a bit more like illustrated form. And so here's my engineering coming in. So if you have like basically two forces, one force that wants to come out, but then it's not socially acceptable, then the other force works against it. You need the exact equal measure of force in order to like not make the thing come out. So, and when these two forces come together, then okay, there's equilibrium, nothing happens. And your behavior will not show in the world. However, in that moment, you're using so much of your resources to basically fight against the part of yourself. So you are having a war within yourself with your own resources, which only leaves you the remainder of your resources to do good things in the world, or whatever good means, or do other things in the world. Now, the part that wants to come out, it only needs to be repressed if you're in an environment that's not safe or where it's not appropriate. Now, if you're finding an environment where that behavior coming out is safe and is appropriate, and you effectively in that moment accept yourself and channel that part of yourself, then these two arrows, they add up into this arrow here, that's the blue one. And so you're suddenly not only freeing up the energy that you used to like repress part of yourself, but you're also freeing up the energy that was already moving into this direction anyway. And my grandpa always said this saying of that, like, water has a pointy head, which I only really understood in my adult years. But what he was saying is that, wow, energy will always find a way to come out. And if you're not channeling it, then it's going to run havoc in your life. And it's the same, really, when I think about a river. We can either just have the river do whatever, or we can build structures for this river to actually harness the energy. So we could build a mill, and then this mill could mill the grain, and we can make bread from it, or whatever we may please. But it's allowing the energy that wants to come out anyway to come out in ways that are productive and healthy and positive. And if we don't have these structures, then it will come out in destructive and contorted and kind of twisted ways that create more destruction in our lives than good. And we're all wired for these peak states. So we're all wired to live a life that is fully self-expressed. And in that sense, also, like, any behavior can be addictive. Like going to the gym like every single day. For some people, it's something that's super helpful. For other people, it's an addictive behavior. To engage sexually, for some people, it's like super fucking addictive. For other people, it's like, wow, this is actually how I build intimacy. And that's really, really the important part here, is that an addiction is something that I do when I don't want to feel what is actually present for me to feel in that moment. And so the addiction is really something that makes me check out from the present moment. And it's something that creates shame and isolation. And I think it's really important to look at it from that perspective, rather than take sort of the kind of, generalized brush of society, thinking like, well, these things are addictive, these things are not addictive. There's a fine line between drinking a few times a week and actually enjoying it socially to alcohol becoming something addictive. It's the same substance, but the way people engage with it is different. Same with nicotine, caffeine. I would say there's a large portion of our society that's like heavily caffeine addicted. However, it's such an socially acceptable way of being, like, to the point where it's like, yeah, let's meet for coffee, for actually like, hey, let's connect. And it became so integrated, but it does create a lot of dependencies. Now, and that's also the interesting piece there, that as long as the engagement with a substance or with a behavior creates more connection and dissolves shame, then it is, from my perspective, a really valid way of engaging with that. And if somebody smoking socially it enables for them to connect more with the people around them and dissipates the shame of like potentially things that they are hiding. Then it's like, wow, amazing, go do. But if it's like something that needs to be done like every morning after you wake up, and you don't really want to talk to people about that you're doing that, then it's on the other side, and it's something that's actually more destructive in your life. So it's really coming down to the point that, from my perspective, addictions are these misguided energies, and they come out in moments when we are stressed. Because our systems always want to self-soothe. Our systems aim to find a state of equilibrium. And depending on our early experience in life, our upbringing, all of us have different ways of coping and managing stress. And for some of us, we had the great privilege to basically find coping mechanisms and self-soothing strategies that are healthy, that lead us into more connections. And for others, we started out with coping strategies that were actually moving us more into isolation. And now for the ones where the self-soothing strategy led more into isolation, I feel that's really where addictions are that portal or that pointer to a deeper need and the desire for a deeper expression. So I'll share a bit more about my own experience here, really around like codependence and porn addiction. So for me, my early experience was that I was born, and then I was born in the GDR. And there was a system of like, okay, kids get born and then they get put into a room with other kids, and they come out when there's breastfeeding time, and then they get fed, and then they go back into their room. And then I was born supposedly with like a weird sound in my heart, so that I stayed in the hospital for 5 weeks while my mom went home after a few days. And so I have this like story of like, oh, I've been rejected. Now, what this led to was basically this quest of like seeking connection, seeking love, and whether this was through like great achievements, which is something that I developed, sort of like in my childhood and teens, to be seen by my parents for like being an amazing student and creating lots of cool things. But ultimately, it's been always this quest of seeking for connection, and specifically seeking for physical connection. So while coupled at the same time with this intense avoidance for any sense of possible rejection. And now that was for me where I was moving into like porn space, where I could in some way experience that level of connection, that level of like physical pleasure, without having the risk of actually potentially being rejected. And the piece there is that, however, without vulnerability, it will never be satisfying, because only the vulnerability of actually potentially being rejected, but opening up anyway and then being received, that is actually that moment that feels like, wow, that's what I wanted. And the other piece is around this codependence piece as well, because when I in 2018 first went into this like sex addicts fellowship, basically addiction recovery space, I realized like, man, my problem was not the porn. It was really actually codependence. I didn't know what I felt. And so I was always looking to, specifically my intimate partners, be like, tell me who I am. Tell me how I feel. I mean, obviously never that direct, because at the time I didn't really understand it to that level of depth. But it was really this missing inner awareness of my emotions and this missing ability to love myself. And so always basically externalizing, oh wow, this person loves me. And that actually being the addiction. The addiction was, oh, I loved how the person loved me. And that sort of like external guidance. So when I then later on, went into my personal development journey and exploring different plant-based modalities, embodiment modalities, from breath work to trauma release exercises to tapping and all these things, what I realized, and then ultimately leading into the wearable technology, is that the intimacy that I was seeking was actually never really the intimacy with another person. I mean, obviously that's a beautiful thing to like share and experience it, but the intimacy that I was seeking was really the intimacy with myself. Like, who am I? Like, what do I feel? Why do I feel what I feel? And that inner quest of exploring and being present basically with all the feelings that are already there, rather than outsourcing somebody else to feel my feelings and then telling you like, yeah, Toby, this is going on for you. So, and that's where, for me, exploring wearable tech has been super, super insightful, because I noticed that I'm a like super visual person, and effectively what it has given me is it has given me a dashboard for my body. It's given me a dashboard for my autonomic nervous system, and then a window to understand, cool, this is what feeling good actually feels like. Which sounds really weird, but in my experience, basically being traumatized, I didn't know what feeling good felt like, because I was basically like so connected from sort of like my heart and my sort of emotional body, that I needed to see it to be able to re-engage with it. And now, the wearable tech is, I'm looking at it more like training wheels. It's a modality that enables rather than something that I continue to need. And I feel that's the important piece here as well, is because otherwise it just becomes another dependency. But seeing it as a tool to gain deeper self-understanding, but then being ultimately able to be present with yourself and feeling what it is that happens. Now, I want to take you through a few of these paradigm shifts. So there's 3 paradigm shifts that I want to bring in before looking at some of the visuals. So the first paradigm shift, so I just got a question. I can't understand the name of the modality you're using. Probably wearable technology. So yeah, it's wearable technology. Heart rate variability. I'll get into that in 4 slides actually. So the first paradigm shift is really that addiction is an energy wellspring. And what I mean by that is that for a long time, you see addictions kind of like suck energy from your life, and it's a bit like a black hole. But the moment you are able to kind of go back into it, you're able to release that again. And the powerful piece here is that you've become very connected basically with that part of yourself. And so every addictive act has basically, from my perspective, been a deposit that you made into that space. So the moment you are then connecting with that darkness, you're able to basically withdraw the deposits that you made over time and allow that to energize your life again. So in Buddhism, we often speak about like turning kind of poison into medicine. That's really where I see that the moment there's this level of self-awareness, our addictions become this energy wellspring, and really that addictive poison that we had suddenly becomes that medicine that we can experience ourselves and then like share with others as well. The next paradigm is really that addiction becomes a pointer to purpose, which may sound really, really weird, but I find that when we are able to actually connect with the part of ourselves that has found all these coping strategies, we know exactly where we need to go to find like more meaning and sort of a deeper purpose. Because addiction arises out of a misalignment in your life. And in my life, the misalignment, I feel, was that I stepped into spaces where I felt I could be loved because I couldn't love myself. but it felt like it came at such a cost. I needed to give up so many things that I wanted to do. And for me, it was really like seeking intimacy, physical touch, sexual experiences. And like all these things, they don't necessarily need to come from a committed relationship. And at the time, that was potentially not really what I wanted. And so what I've noticed over the last few years is that, yeah, I want to experience the wide variety of sexual experiences. And so potentially being in a committed relationship that's monogamous is not my path forward, but it's something much more like open relating or playing in the kink space that is actually much more nourishing to me. Because it really creates these deep levels of intimacy. And it does so in a way that from my upbringing seemed like so away from the norm. But the more I've been exploring that space, the more I'm realizing, wow, there's like thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that play in these spaces. And it's a very different level of sexual awareness and evolution that, yeah, can be exchanged. So what I want to say here with the purpose piece as well is that the addiction is really unevolved, sort of like the best guess of your kind of like younger self, if you want, person in creating what your soul really wants to experience in this lifetime. And I feel for me, it's about like deep intimacy. And it may at some point be monogamous relationship. At the moment, it's let's play and experience. And also the addiction points to the thing that we're most afraid of. And that for me is definitely like the physical connectivity. Whether it's in dancing, so I'm dancing salsa, but it's like every time it's like, whoo, holy fuck. I literally feel like so scared doing it. But then it's also the best thing when I'm actually doing it. And that's the cool thing, that really like, under fear is always freedom. And if I'm too afraid to actually lean into the fear, then yeah, I'll do some addictive behavior and boom, nothing happens. And I'm still feeling constrained and enchained. So that's really the point of turning your karma basically into your mission in life, if you want. And yeah, then the last paradigm shift is turning addiction into flow. It is really like turning these addictive triggers into flow triggers. And the questions here are really like, what does your body crave? And then like, why does it crave it, the things it craves? What role, does the addiction play in your life? And how does it impact your autonomic nervous system balance? Now that is where really heart rate variability comes in really powerfully. And I'll take you through a few cool self-experimentation pieces here now. Where first piece is turning these addictive tendencies into flow triggers. So what I've created here for you is a screenshot from the Autonom Health tool. So that's a chest belt basically that you wear on your chest, and it measures the electric signal from your heart, and then there's a whole bunch of great analysis on it. The high level here is that the illustrations you see is called a live fire. So it shows basically the energy that is in your heart at any given moment throughout the 24 hours of the day. And here in the first two graphics, I've taken out some screenshots from moments when I was engaging with pornography and lovemaking. So what you see is that the intensity of the energy in my heart is much more intense in the upper illustration. And then when you go into the lower illustration, it's not just more intense, but it also it's more varied. There's a much broader experience of heartbeats, basically. And what this means is that my nervous system is stepping into a space of like parasympathetic activation, because usually I'm quite sympathetically activated, so I'm much more like a kind of like go do, let's get into the world and do things. But then my nervous system obviously wants to like, hey, move energy in, become present with what's going on for you. And that was one of the modalities where porn has been a way to get that connection. Now I'll take you to the next slide, because the cool thing is then once you understand like why is your nervous system wanting what it wants, like what's basically baseline, and how can you trigger it in a different way, then you can swap out these triggers. And for me, breathwork is an amazing modality. So you see here in the lower illustration that when I do breathwork, it gives me a very similar signature to when I was previously engaging with porn. Now, and that was only possible after I had the insight of, amazing, thank you, nervous system, thank you, body, for giving me this experience. And now I can swap it out and swap it for breathwork, which I can do like in a meeting room, and easy peasy, you know, I can actually do it with others. I can guide others through it as well. And so it becomes much more that connective experience where I can share the practice and everybody can benefit from. In the illustration at the top, you see that last Saturday I was feeling like really miserable actually, and so I just like slept all day. And that's obviously what my nervous system needed, because it shows you just the flames are like well distributed, they're nice and high, and so you have that sympathetic parasympathetic activation. And so my body just felt it was in the space of really needing a day of rest, and so it created like, okay, boom, hard reset, just sleep, feel miserable. But when I looked at the graphic afterwards, it was like, wow, actually it looks not at all like how I felt. And that's again one of these things of recalibrating. Yes, it may feel like a sickness, but ultimately when I look at the data, is wow, the body just needed time to restore and be in that much more balanced state of being. And then it's also about cracking your flow code, because on the one hand it's like creating that level of like relaxed awareness, but also finding these modalities that focus your energy again. And for me, you see here in that graphic, I have found this Buddhist chanting practice, which is an open eye chanting meditation, and that condenses all my energy in that space of sympathetic activation. It's like, boom, let's go, let's do something. And now, last piece from what HRV can show amongst like a whole bunch of other cool things, is actually what is your potential to flow? Because in order to flow, we do need a whole bunch of resources and energy in our body. And here in the top, you see the imagery of someone who's like well resourced, with flames that are going high, with like nice color distribution. Well, in the bottom, you see somebody in a state of burnout, where you hardly see any flames. And if you want to get into flow states, you do need reserves. And unless you actually really understand, okay, like where are my reserves and how do I replenish them, then again, it's also more difficult to step into that state of flow. And that's really the last piece I do want to leave you with, where when we are on this pathway into flow and into realizing, okay, like who are we, like what are our darknesses, what are our lightnesses, and where are our addictive triggers that potentially create shame and a desire to isolate, and how can we turn that into self-acceptance and self-compassion and self-love, allowing us to be like, whoa, great, my body always knows. Once you know like what practices basically move you into that state of relaxed awareness, in my case, breathwork, for example, and you know what practices create that level of real focused attention, where you basically first activate your parasympathetic nervous system, then you activate your sympathetic nervous system, then you have a predictable way of stepping into that state of flow as often as you want and as reliably as you want, ultimately becoming a more productive and constructive participant in society. Now, as I said in the very beginning, is that having seen these patterns in myself and having seen how much heart rate variability can contribute to creating a level of data-driven self-compassion where no addictive behavior needs to be a source for shame any longer, to be like, oh man, I need to hide away because I'm such a terrible human. It's more like, wow, my earlier version has found a modality that works to find balance. Now, being more evolved, I will reinvestigate that and see if I can find another modality that's actually moving me more into connection with others. And as I believe it goes very quickly, or at least it went for me super, super quickly, I want to invite 3 people into joining that alpha program to see, like, does it actually work for others, or did it only work for myself? So it's a thing that I will run free of charge in the beginning of the next year, from the 9th of January to the 10th of February. And basically all you need to be part of that experiment, or that, flow code cracking, or the combusting of your addictive behaviors, or however you want to frame that for yourself, is a chest belt that gives you a heart rate signal, and then you will need access to the autonomous health evaluation software. So actually, Talita, when you click here the apply for alpha program, the button under the slides, that will open that code, or that link. But I can also do that for you and share it with you in the chat. So yeah, and I really believe that we're really at this amazing, at this beginning of like this amazing voyage to like personal sovereignty, where for me, I was codependent because I didn't know what I felt, and I didn't really have like any way of like understanding myself more deeply. But then like finding different embodied modalities, from breath work to plant medicine, to then also heart rate variability, to brainwave assessments, it gave me this insight into like, why is my body operating the way it does? And by understanding like why we operate the way we do, it gives us an insight into who we are, which gives an insight like why we frame the world on the outside the way that we frame it. And by this like personal sovereignty, I'm seeing that we are now opening this in a way like kind of fast track to becoming much more powerful creators of our own reality, and much more conscious, and more quickly becoming conscious of like how we're actually creating the world around us. Because in so many ways, yes, our mind does all the like thinking, but it can never be present. It's always in the past or in the future. And I've been like so often in the future. But the only time that we actually have to change something is the present moment. And that's really where our body is the absolute like most sophisticated technology that there is. Where any like wearable tech is only, it's only a supplementary thing to actually better understand like how we operate. It's basically like tech to better understand like the most evolved tech. And so I feel the and I'll go back to that slide here. So the embodied flow code, it's I think most optimal for people that live really massively in their heads, like high achievers that they see the future, they want to create it, but they're quite disconnected from their body and from their heart. Because basically that was me, and I know it worked for me, and I believe it can work for anyone who has that same predisposition of like being super heady and quite body disconnected. Okay, cool. So there's a couple of questions here from Don and from Anonymous. So Don, you were asking like, how do you use the HRV to change behavior or your actions? So the way you use it is that HRV gives you an understanding of what your nervous system does when you do these behaviors. And so in my case, when I was engaging with porn, my nervous system was actually finding a state of balance that then allowed me to understand like, wow, cool. Basically, my nervous system wants to find balance. So I can find any other modality to find balance. And then what the tech really does, it draws awareness to that behavior, and it allows you to understand like why you do that behavior. And so you can make a new meaning on that. And with that new meaning, that will then change your actions. And that's also when we do the alpha program, we will, it will be obviously that heart rate variability tech, but the other big piece around it is that community component and finding the really personalized ways of like, wow, what does your data mean to you? Really, this meaning making is a massive, massive component. Because ultimately, what does tech do? Tech only gives you data. But data doesn't mean anything until you make meaning that will positively influence your life. So there was a question around the wearable technology, so the heart rate variability kit. So if you have already a chest strap, then you only need the software, which is I think like 60 euros or something. And if you need this chest strap and the software, then it's 200 euros. Okay, and then Bilal was asking what breathwork practice I practice. So there's a number of different ones. I have done a lot of Wim Hof breathwork, which has been super, super, so good. But yeah, that does take a bit of time. Then there was a friend of mine, he's called Richie Bostock. And he has a breathwork app called Flourish. So I've done, there's a journey in there that is called New Beginnings. And so it's a breathwork that obviously lots of deep breaths and then breath retention and squeezing of like the perineum and your whole core. So moving the energy basically from your base to the top of your spine. That was super powerful. Most recently, I'm doing much, much shorter pieces. There is a breathwork app called Calm that I use every now and again. But then the interesting piece as well is like once I have understood, okay, like what is the basic breathing rhythm of it, then I just do it like easy peasy. So one of the practices to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system is to breathe in for 4 seconds, then out for 7, and you just repeat it. So easy thing to take away potentially is if you focus on the out breath, if you focus and elongate or extend the out breath, then it stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system, so your rest and digest. And if you focus on the in breath, then it engages your sympathetic, so your stress and activation part of the nervous system. And yeah, beautiful humans. We'll leave it here for today. If you have any extra questions, I'll put my email in the chat and you can email me. And yeah, for any of you who are keen to be part of the Alpha program in the beginning of the new year, I will look forward to having calls with you and getting to know you more and seeing how this can be a beautiful transformative journey. Alrighty, beautiful humans, much love.